Rwanda is holding the 30th commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, the tragedy that claimed more than 1 million innocent lives in just 100 days. There is a call to action, a call to renew our commitment to never again. In this exclusive interview, I'm joined with Ms. Alice Wairimu Nderitu, the Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General on the Genocide Prevention. Thank you so much, Madam Special Advisor. My name is Eugene Uwimana, and I'm in charge of communications in the Office of the UN Resident Coordinator. I thank you so much for your time. 30 years after the horrific 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, do you think the world has learned a lesson?
That there have been quite a number of lessons that have been learned. Many of the lessons have been learned from the fact of a country like Rwanda emerging from that kind of tragedy to become the leader it is now. The sacrifices, the huge amount of work around accountability, around reconciliation that has happened in this country. I think that's a very big thing to learn. Always we ask ourselves, what is it we can learn from post-genocidal societies? What is it they can teach us to help us to prevent another genocide? And so from Rwanda, we've learned quite a bit in terms of first, how potent ethnicity can be if it's left to be manipulated, especially by politicians or by people who have other interests. But at the same time, we have learned that human beings tend to forget very fast. That now it's only 30 years since the genocide happened. When it happened, I had graduated from the University of Nairobi already, and I had worked for about 3 years in 1994. I was 24, and we became very conscious that there was something really wrong going on in Rwanda, because we had a lot of people, lots of people, refugees. But also, I also remember that as the period when we stopped eating fish, because people were saying, if you can't eat fish because the rivers and the lakes are full of the dead people who are Tutsi. So the first time I actually began to really internalize, although we'd learned in history and about the people of Rwanda, but for me, the internalization that this is happening to the Tutsi happened because people were saying, even in the market, people were saying, we are not going to sell fish because these fish have eaten the Tutsi. So I would say there were lessons then that needed to be continued for people to collectively, without being told by anyone, not to eat fish and not eat that fish. These were lessons that needed to be brought down to levels where people then know that this is something that's completely unacceptable. So I would say that the larger world, the fact that up to now, the investment in prevention in terms of finances and human resources is almost zero, whereas the investment in defense is so high, and defense comes after.
Right now, as you speak, war is still rampant in some places of the world. We can say Sudan, Ukraine, Gaza. Are you worried that the history can repeat itself?
It does. If you've seen my statements, you would know it does. And in these statements, I've spoken to the risk factors for the risk of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in Gaza, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in the DRC, in Myanmar, in so many places. So routinely, that's my job. Like, I'm supposed to provide early warning. Some of it I do confidentially to the Secretary General, some of it to the Security Council. So there is a lot of amount of information that's out there that lets us know that risk factors for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity exist. So it does worry me, and it worries me that we put out these risk factors, and the coordinated reaction to it, like from the world, from regional bodies, the African Union, the East African community, is not there. So I would say, considering that I'm here right now, the Democratic Republic of Congo, I have consistently put out statements regarding the very clear statements that have been issued by leaders demonizing people of Tutsi origin, the Banyamulenge, using that tired narrative of stereotypes during an election year. And now with social media, the narrative is out there. Young people have taken up this narrative, and you never know what they could do with this narrative. So I would say I have a very specific concern for that narrative that against the Tutsi in DRC. I have a very specific worry, and I know to myself that part of the lessons that you asked earlier, whether they've been learned or not, there are lessons in accountability that haven't been learned. We had a lot of people who left this country, went to the DRC as refugees, set up the FDLR, and these were people who are genocidaires, up to today not held to account by anyone. I was recently in Zambia. They have refugees there who also were genocidaires here, who are not held to account. So I would say I'm worried about the situations that you've put out, but the fact that I'm here for Kwibuka 30, I'm especially worried about the countries around Rwanda that harbor refugees who are genocidaires, who are not held to account, who continue to propagate the ideology of genocide against the Tutsi. That worries me a great deal. Now, if there are lessons that we learned as the world, and still there is that worry, Madam Special Advisor, why did we go wrong? I think much of the time our leadership in the world privileges geopolitics over the protection of populations at risk. I would say the interests of specific countries over populations of people who are at risk. The world has not centered the people who are at risk. The world has not decided, this is my focus, this is who I'm looking at, and we must make sure that nobody else ever dies from a genocide. So the world looks at things from different perspectives other than the protection of the person who is at risk.
Yeah, but you actually touched on my last question, which is, what do we do now? What is your call to action?
Yeah, right now, I'm doing a lot to build a critical mass of people who, first of all, understand what genocide is. That genocide is not just any crime, it's not just any murder, it's not just too many people being killed. That genocide is planned, it's systematic, and that in a court of law, you have to prove intention, that there was intent to completely annihilate or destroy in whole or in part this particular group of people that's targeted. And that genocide is a crime of identity. It's only targeted towards identities. So there is a lot of work to be done in education. As we were speaking, people who were born 30 years ago were not alive when this genocide happened. It's so profound for me to think that way, because for me it's so alive when we stopped eating fish. And the fact that these young people were not alive to experience what we experienced means we have to keep teaching them so that history does not repeat itself. And we have to teach the basics, which I just find surprising, that we have to teach people, why is it called the genocide against the Tutsi? Genocides happen to identity groups. The definition of the word genocide speaks to the intent to destroy in whole or in part. And the protected groups under the Genocide Convention are the ethnic groups ethnic, race, religious, national. So you have to fall under those four. So when we talk about the genocide against the Tutsi, we have a General Assembly resolution that describes the name of this genocide as a genocide against the Tutsi in which Hutu and others were killed. When people say, so many people were killed, what they don't understand is that these were arguments that were actually prosecuted before courts of law. And a court of law determined for the very first time in the world, the first person to be convicted of genocide was here in Rwanda, the Akayesu case, the very first. To prove that a genocide has happened, it's very rigorous legal and prosecutorial work. It's a lot of work, which is why we have so few people prosecuted for the crime of genocide in the world, and which is why it's called the crime of crimes. So the weaponization of the name, the instrumentalization of the name genocide, people want to draw attention to whatever is happening to them by saying, oh, what's happening to us is genocide, because they want people to feel their pain. But always, it's so important to know that first, genocides can only be determined by courts of law. That nobody else has that prerogative to determine, not even me. I cannot say there's a genocide happening in this place. What I do is say there are risk factors for genocide. I always tell people, imagine if a room is dark and I'm the one with the torch. So I'm shining and I'm saying, can you see this table here? Can you see, don't fall over this chair here? Don't fall. That's what I do. I say this is what exists. And these are the kind of things that I've been saying. I'm seeing risk factors in the DRC. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about how you work with the Office of the Prosecutor. What are you doing now to make sure that the genocide suspects who are roaming freely in different countries are brought to book? How are you working with the Office of the Prosecutor?
The framing of the Genocide Convention of 1948, it's called the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So I'm working on prevention, and the Office of the Prosecutor is working on accountability, on punishment. So of course we are very interlinked, because through punishment you can prevent, and of course through prevention you can ensure accountability. So we work very closely. And he has been pursuing a number of people who've been indicted for this crime of genocide. He has more than 1,000 people who are still free 30 years after the genocide. And we keep each other updated. And as soon as they able to find somebody who they've been pursuing, I always issue a statement in support. So like for Kabuga, I did a lot of statements saying very grateful, saying this, hoping for a trial, which unfortunately is not happening. Because that trial, the trial of Kabuga, I wanted it to, I hoped it would educate the world on exactly what happened here. Kaishema, who was recently caught also in South Africa, we've been issuing statements, but also behind the scenes we do a lot of diplomatic work together. Because by the time somebody like that is arrested, we need to do lots of diplomacy with the government. So we do a lot of functions together. We hold workshops together. Recently I was in Arusha, and he's the prosecutor of the International Residue Mechanism, and I was invited for the judicial colloquium as a keynote speaker the last time when I was in Arusha, just about maybe 3 weeks ago. We do a lot of work together.
Let's come to the end of our interview. Do you have something else you need to share with us that we didn't touch on?
I'd just like to say to the people of Rwanda, for me, I feel I have a very strong duty to make sure that people who suffered these genocides, the victims, the survivors, to ensure that it's not the survivors who have to keep telling people that this genocide happened. We have to help them. And we have to build a whole critical mass of people who need to stand up for these survivors. And I think for me that's my key message for Kwipo Kafati, that I'm here in Kigali today, knowing that I'm in this very privileged position where I have agency and I have voice, where when I speak people listen, and I must speak for those survivors. I must help them articulate to the world that what happened to them was a genocide and that the risk of it happening again is real. And that therefore we have to keep speaking about it over and over and over again. Because speaking about what happened to the Tutsi here in Rwanda, the genocide against the Tutsi here in Rwanda, speaking about it helps prevent genocide in other places. Because there are lessons to be drawn from what happened here that are learned in other places around the world. And I'm always emphasizing that I work in an office that was created because of the failure of the United Nations to stop a genocide in Rwanda, a genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And that I do hold myself very responsible in terms of making sure that I keep speaking. I have to keep speaking so that then anything else that would happen to the people here in Rwanda would not be a consequence of the UN having done little or nothing.
Madam Special Advisor, I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.